I'll start with introductions. So welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to introduce Jesper Hedberg today, who's director of the Testa Center. Jesper, I think, has been director here since the Testa Center was launched in 2016. Prior to this, he worked in several different roles in industry, including senior scientist and team leader roles at AstraZeneca. And he joined GE Healthcare Life Sciences, which has now become Cytiva, in 2012 as a product development manager before moving across to the Testa Center. So welcome, Jesper. Fantastic to have you. And we look forward to hearing about opportunities that are going on at the center now.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that nice introduction, and thanks for inviting me to speak and present the Testa Center here at this audience. Always nice to hear your resume like that. It's you don't think of it too often, but that's me. I'm now the director of Testa Center. Have been so since we opened in August 2018. So we've been open for a little bit more than 3 years. So we're starting to have a number of projects up through the house. So I was thinking that I will take a couple of slides to describe the background around Testa Center, what the concept is and what it is. It's actually a relatively new concept, I would say. And then I'll try to describe the offering in Testa Center and what is achievable as a project when you come to Testa Center. And then end off with a couple of project examples, really just one sliders. I think it's 3 examples. So those are more or less teasers, I would say. I won't go into depth there. Teasers for what different companies and academic groups have been able to achieve in Testa Center. With that, I'll share my screen or my presentation. Here we go. There. And presentation mode should be on right now.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. So we are a test bed or a research facility, if you like, for both biology and technology innovation for production of biological products. So the biology innovation comes natural, of course. It's like new proteins, new cells, or new way of purifying something. But when it comes to biological production, there is also a wealth of technology innovation that could be thought of. So, for instance, sensors, pumps, gadgets in general that could make the bioprocessing workflow more efficient. And of course, digital applications. So digital innovations that would help to make the biological production more efficient. So we're a test bed to be able to verify those innovations. We have a vision, and that is that we together accelerate the journey of world-changing innovation. And I would like to just emphasize the word together there. We have, if we didn't know that from before, we have the last year realized that we cannot do anything by our own. We need to work together. I mean, the last year, even competitors have gone together to be able to bring vaccines to market, for instance. And this is the same case in Testa Center and globally, I would argue. So that we from Testa Center, together with the clients, but also instrument vendors and other types of services, can join forces and make the journey of these innovations faster. Our mission, we do this by enabling researchers and projects and small companies, and also large companies actually, to verify their innovation. And we enable them to do that in an environment which is relevant for the end usage, which then is a production-like environment. So what you see behind me is I'm not in the lab. It's a picture, of course, it's a fake background, but it's a picture from one of our labs, which then is should be similar to a modern production floor for biological production. And by being an environment which is relevant for production, we also enable these projects to accelerate the industrialization of these innovations. And then lastly, our third pillar, we have experienced the last 10 years an extremely fast development within the biological production. So 10 years ago, quite few drugs on the market actually were biologics. Today, we are reaching we haven't reached a 50-50 share, I would say, but very close. A significant number of drugs on the market today are biologics, and that has happened the last 10 years, basically. And this very, very fast development also have resulted in that we're lagging a little bit in competence around biological production, both when it comes to student educations, but also the general know-how within the research community and the startup community. So secure excellence is one of our third pillars. Okay, some background around Testa Center. So we're an initiative between the Swedish government and Cytiva, with the overarching goal to support the growth of life science industry. Since this is a private-public partnership between the Swedish government and Cytiva, we have received soft funding, and to be able to do that, we have generated a separate legal entity, which is defined as non-profit. So we do reside on the site of Cytiva in Uppsala, Sweden, but we're actually a separate legal entity here. So we do not belong to the big commercial company here in Sweden, although that we are in the same corporate structure. But we're non-profit, so the intention for us to be sustainable over time is to cover our costs, but the intention is not to generate cash. And we're an international and national test bed, which is accessible both for academia and bioprocess industry, and of course startups. So that have technology or biology innovations that needs to be verified in production environment. We describe ourselves as an industrial infrastructure lab in pilot scale. So what does that mean then? So for us, that means that we have relatively large pieces of equipment. I'll show a slide of our equipment offering, but just very, very briefly, we have exact same pieces of equipment that you would find in a GMP environment, although that we are non-GMP. So which means that you cannot generate material for clinical trials in Testa Center, but you can do scale-up experiments and proof of concept experiments and reduce risk when going up in scale. Typically, we're based on single use for the upstream, multi-use for the downstream. And also within Testa Center, we have bioprocessing expertise to help you bring your projects into Testa Center and through Testa Center. We are, as I said, our third pillar is secure excellence. We're also open for advanced education. So today, Uppsala University conducts lots of exercises, student exercises here in Testa Center. We also do lots of study visits. So that can be done very easily over link. So that's done frequently, I would say, both from labs or just like this, like a presentation. So again, spreading the knowledge around biological production is important, I think. So what do you get when you come to Testa Center? This is a very, very simple slide describing the two major needs that Project Express needs for when they come here. So of course, we have labs. We have 4 bioprocessing suites, one of which is to the left there in the picture. That's the largest suite. So 4 of those we have, so a bioprocessing lab, and then we can equip this lab with bioprocessing equipment. And you might see there on the picture that it's lots of the equipment is on wheels, and actually all our equipment pieces basically are on wheels, which means that we are very, very flexible in furnishing each lab depending on the project needs that they have for that particular project. So and also we have a relatively large equipment park here in Testa Center, which means that much of the needs that are expressed from projects we can suffice. So that's a very tangible, of course, thing that you get in Testa Center, access to these pieces of equipment and a lab. Also, we provide a lot of technical support. So many of the projects are well trained when it comes to running a bioprocessing, for instance, bioreactor or a protein purification process in larger scale. But some of the projects also is not trained in this and need some support when they come to Testa Center. So we provide that technical support, getting up and running, understanding the equipment and the pros and cons with each type of equipment that we have. What we also do that we engage very early with projects when they start to think about performing a project in Testa Center. So during the planning phase and defining exactly which type of consumables can be used in Testa Center, which types of bioreactor bags do we need to bring, and so forth. So that technical support is also very valued by many of the projects, or I would say all the projects actually, to be honest. Along with that, we also get all the stuff that you usually find in a lab, of course. So general lab equipment, office space, meeting rooms, Wi-Fi, printer, and stuff like that. And since we are on the Uppsala site here in Uppsala, or the Cytiva site here in Uppsala, we also piggyback on all the facility service, security, waste management that are already established here in Uppsala, so that we didn't need to reinvent that wheel. What is important to say, what is perhaps also what you do not get by default when you come to Testa Center. So the intention is not that we, for instance, perform projects for anyone. So we're not a contracting lab in that sense. Which means that we do not per default provide project resources for execution of your project. We do stay with you, just as in the picture that's actually Andreas Andersson. He's in the picture looking into the camera. He will be perhaps side by side with you when you start up the bioreactor, but it's not intended that he will perform the actual run. So the intention is that you should come here and do some project. Now, being from abroad of Sweden, that might pose some challenges. So you might need some help by independent contractors here in Sweden or from UK. So I'll come back to that in a little second on how it's possible to resource a project. What you do not get in Testa Center also is consumables. All projects have different needs for when it comes to consumables, so you need to bring the consumables yourself, and same thing with the chemicals. So, and typically projects place orders and set Testa Center as delivery address so that the consumables are here for day one when they start to do project lab work. Our labs are designed for what we call a start to finish process, which means that we'll have for upstream culture possibilities of both mammalian microbial cells from milliliter scale, shaker flasks or microtiter plates, all the way up to larger shaker flasks, and then entry into bioreactors. So our largest bioreactor for microbial cells are 200 liter, and for mammalian cells 500 liters. And all the scales below that, of course. And then harvesting is also possible, of course, in Testa Center, along with protein purification. We are by heritage a protein purification company, the Cytiva company, so we'll have most of the equipment that are available for protein purification. What I would like to say with this slide is that we have, as you see, ballroom style labs, which means that we can furnish it any way. So any way that is needed or any way that the project wants. Some of the projects only do upstream. Some of the projects only do downstream. Some of the projects do the whole full-fledged start to finish process. Our offering actually ends with the purified protein. So we do not have fill and finish or, for instance, dry freezers in Testa Center at this moment. So this is the scope of project, technically the scope of project that is possible to do. This is basically the instrumentation list. It's a quite boring slide, but it's nevertheless good to get a feeling for what kind of types of equipment we have. So again, for culturing bioreactors, both in shaker platforms and stir tank platforms. For harvest, we have filtering systems, both for TFF, for depth filtration, and we also have a continuous centrifuge from Alfa Laval. And if you run a microbial process, you might want to homogenize your cell broth. For that, we have high pressure homogenization and sonication. And then hardware for protein purification. So any type of system that you could think of, basically anything from the smallest ECTA start all the way up to full-fledged production ECTA process. With that, we have hardware for the columns. but not resin. So resin is considered a consumable, so you need to bring the resin yourself. Doing things at scale also requires that you can handle fluids in larger amounts. So bins and mixers to be able to handle a couple of 100 liters of fluid is here in Testa Center. When it comes to analytical equipment, we are relatively limited. We decided from the beginning actually that we should focus on the bioprocess and be able to provide the analytics needed to run a process as such, which means that cell counters, metabolite analyzers, microscopes we have in Testa Center. We also have relatively basic protein analytical techniques like SDS-PAGE, HPLC, Western blot, Biocore, but not any more advanced than that. So mass spec, for instance, NMR, CD requires a little bit more heavier equipment, and that is not in Testa Center at the moment. If that is needed, many of the projects has assays for that. They typically send their samples for doing those types of assays, either in their home lab or in someone that they already collaborate with. We do have a biosafety level class 2 for vaccine and gene therapy processes. We just, there was one project doing an exit from Testa Center a couple of weeks ago that established a scalable gene therapy process from start to finish. So that was really, really fun. Please check out our homepage if you like. We will post a news flash on that and what they were able to achieve in Testa Center. It's not finished quite yet, but within a week or two, we'll be happy to present that a little bit more in detail if you're interested in gene therapy process, for instance. So typically, we're a house that contains lots of competence, lots of instrumentation, and this picture, I guess, is a try from us to try to describe that the projects usually come to Testa Center with a process which is relatively small scale, sometimes not knowing how to take that forward and to bring it into larger scale if that is the need. And you can come into Testa Center and do your project, both make it scalable, but also do pivots and change direction within Testa Center if that is needed, and hopefully come out on the other end a little bit stronger team, knowing your process better, perhaps with a larger amount of material and hopefully a scalable process. And these are some of the things that feedback that we collected from projects when being in Testa Center. So many of the commercial projects, they want to show scalability. They want to show manufacturability, and they want to show robustness. So taking the step into, many of them take the first step into production equipment in Testa Center, and by doing that, they also show scalability, which then, for some of the projects, builds trust towards investors, sometimes towards their management, actually, and in general to the external audience, and basically proving that their process is scalable and ready for industrialization. Many of the academic projects have a need for larger amounts of material. So quite recently, we had an academic project where they used to do a protein prep every month. It took that particular PhD student a week to do that prep. And then he did that every month to be able to do his assays and to do the research that he was conducting on that particular protein. And then that research group came to Testa Center. They did 2 large preps, and then they had protein amount that lasted them the whole PhD period from that on. So which then, of course, is very good. So that kind of gives them more bandwidth to do the actual research that they are conducting, instead of spending time prepping that protein over and over again. Something that many projects have described is important for them is that they have built know-how around their own projects. So when you want to take if you have a protein that you would like to be produced in larger scale, there is always an opportunity to have that contracted, so contract manufacturing, and that's a good option for many, particularly when it comes to GMP. However, if you do not know much about your own process at scale, it can be hard to shop for such a service. And having it done it yourself once or twice in Testa Center, build that know-how to be able for you to build the spec and to start to engage in those discussions with contracting manufacturers. Fail early and adjust is, of course, also very important when taking projects forward. Flexibility with equipment. Sometimes projects realize quite quickly that what they thought they would need in Testa Center was actually the wrong pieces of equipment. Now, this is not always a big problem here in Testa Center. We have quite a big instrumentation part. If you like, you can download our instrumentation page from our homepage. It's as the downloadable. I think it's under facility and instruments or something like that in a tab at the testacenter.com page. And that is a relatively large list, which means that you can swap instrumentations while you're here, which in turn then saves time and also makes it easy for projects to pivot and adjust when they are here. As I said, the intention is that Testa Center Testa Center is not intended to perform projects for anyone. So the intention is that the project should come to Testa Center. Now, not all projects have everything they need in terms of skill sets and resources to do a bioprocess. Some of the projects need quite a lot of help actually, and that help is possible to get here in Testa Center. So everything from basic support, more or less, when you come in, and having a bioprocessing expert by your side when you discuss or perhaps set up your experiment from the first time. That's a great support, but actually also more focused support like training and education. There are predefined courses that you can go, or you can actually custom build a course specifically for your project. And there are also more extended services and support that you can get here in Testa Center. So consultancies from specialists on all types of themes, anything from process development, experimental design, or tech transfer like that. We can facilitate the contacts to those types of services, and also hands-on resources in Testa Center. We've had projects that travel to Testa Center, set the experiment up, and while they do that in the first, say the first days or first week, they do that together with contractors, local contractors, and then when you get the bioreactor up and running, perhaps you want to go home to your family for a week or two. Those local contractors maintain the bioreactor run, or during that, the phase when it's not super intense, and then when it's time to harvest or protein purification, then the core team comes into Testa Center again and do the experiments together with contractors. So modulating the research force is possible to do in Testa Center, and we'd be happy to discuss different solutions with you. This, of course, depends a lot on the particular project needs. Typically, a way for a project entering Testa Center is described in this picture. So very often we start with a very brief feasibility discussion. Is it possible to do? Can we handle the organisms in Testa Center, for instance? Typically E. coli, CHO cells, hex cells, we can handle. The standard GMOs we can take care of in Testa Center, but sometimes we get questions on more exotic things that we need to discuss a little bit more intimately. Next step is usually a plan and prepare. So submit an application to Testa Center and start the detailed planning of the project for the execution phase. I would say that the planning and prepare period takes somewhere between 2 and 6 months typically. I have examples which takes much longer, which is perfectly fine. We are happy to engage early with projects, better earlier than late, I would say. And then entering into the execution phase when coming into Testa Center and doing the actual lab work. So I would say the importance of both plan and prepare and execution is equally heavy. I mean, it's important to get a running start when you enter Testa Center day one. And to be able to get the running start, you need to plan quite a lot, actually. And then in the end, wrap up, summarize your results, perhaps ship your material back home. As you see there, it actually says gear, ship gear. I forgot to say that if you like to bring a piece of equipment into Testa Center, that is also perfectly fine to do. And you're also perfectly fine to use any consumables that you like to use here. So you're not forced to use any particular consumables from any particular vendor. A couple of examples, how I'm doing on time. Okay, so I've been talking for 25 minutes. I think I have a couple of minutes left before we should open up for questions. A very short description of the Uppsala University engagement from Testa Center. They have an agreement with us since the start. It's been extended now to last to 2023, which then covers 25 weeks per year in one of our bioprocessing labs. And since the start, they've used somewhere between up to 70 weeks of usage in Testa Center, both for educational activity and for research projects through the house. And if you like to know more around Uppsala University engagement of Testa Center, I'd be happy to set you in contact or set up a meeting around how that works for them. This is a project example which is very rewarding for me to be a part of. So we got contacted by Solis Biodyne a little bit less than a year ago. They have a product which is a part of the COVID-19 test kit. It's an RNase inhibitor, and as you might understand, their customer demand completely skyrocketed, which meant that they needed to scale up their process. They had a process in much smaller scale in their home lab in Estonia. They came to Testa Center in February 2021, did the scale up to 50-liter scale, and now after summer they've had the second tier in Testa Center and came up to 200-liter scale. And they achieved a lot, I would say. They've refined their upstream process. They also refined their harvesting process, and they swapped a couple of things in their downstream process, make it to a more modern solution. And with that, they have a scalable process, which they now are taking back home to their home lab. And I would say one of the big success factors is, of course, that they have mature innovation and clear goal statements, but the biggest one, I would say, is the close interaction between the experts, both in Testa Center and in Cytiva and with Solis Biodyne during project execution, so that you can iterate a lot when they are here. So it feels good to be a part, actually, of this, that you'll be able to provide Solis Biodyne with the process so that they can continue to provide that very important reagent for COVID-19 test kits. This is another example that we often take up. We have it's a company from Stockholm called Biolamina. They are selling lamines, which is a reagent for cell therapy or stem cell research. They have also experienced quite a high increase of their product, which meant that they needed to scale up their own production capacity. While they were building their own production capacity to larger scale, they also came into Testa Center to scale up their process. In that sense, did both those activities in parallel, and by that both reduced the risk when going up in scale and also saving time, so that they could utilize their own production capacity from day one when they had built it. An academic project that we've had recently in Testa Center is exemplified by a senior lecturer from Uppsala University called Sara Mangsbo. They had from their research a drug candidate that they thought had the potential to to start investigations around having this being brought into clinical trials. But by starting to think about this, they needed to start to industrialize their process. If you want to do a clinical trial, you need to have a production which is much more defined than usually from research scale, and they also needed to go up in scale. So they started to do this in Testa Center. They established a stable cell line for this drug candidate, and then they started to work both on the upstream and the downstream to generate gram quantities of the protein, but also learn how this process would work for them. It's you know, when you do new things, you always need to tweak it a little bit. They stayed in Testa Center for 12 weeks. So 3 months, quite a long project actually, but mammalian cell projects are usually in this length, between 8 to 10 or 12 weeks, somewhere there. And also, while generating material for analytical work and stability testing and further research both in vitro and in vivo, they also built knowledge around the upstream process, how to make a scalable harvest process, and they started to design their downstream process, the protein purification process, to more details than was done before. And then with that as a base, they could start to engage with CMOs when they wanted to go ahead. To the right there, it's also a skill development map of Sara Mangsbo's team. So they learned a lot while they were here. Of course, both Trina, Antonino, Ida, they are in pictures there down below. They were very happy to learn all of these things while being here. So that was just a couple of examples, a couple of teasers, I would say, for projects being in Testa Center. And I'll end off with the one slider. So very shortly, we are non-profit. We give expert support. We're a non-GMP lab for biological production, and we're a private-public partnership. Projects that come into Testa Center get access to unique equipment. They get access to expertise. They pay per usage instead of CapEx. They get a professional network. And of course, depending on the goals of that particular project, but typically what projects are after is a reduction of risk and or increase the know-how of their own process. And by that, increasing the project value. I haven't said this, maybe I should bring this slide earlier. Results and IP, very important to note, to emphasize. So results and IP that is generated by projects in Testa Center are owned by the projects themselves. So you take that with you home. So Cytiva does not have any right to results being generated in Testa Center, or any rights to results and IP. So basically no strings attached really, which is important to emphasize, I think. These are, well, a busy slide with logos. So if you like to know more, you can always visit our homepage and check for testimonials. That's me again, and that's my email there. So please email me if you would like to know more, or please ask question here and now. Today, I'd be happy to stay. I think we have at least 20 minutes left for more discussions. And our homepage is always open, of course. You may also follow us on LinkedIn, by the way. LinkedIn is our primary source for information. So please follow us. But with that, I'll say thank you. And thanks again for inviting me to be able to share this content. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Jesper. Thank you. Really useful and really helpful to see the examples of some of the projects that have come through the center. I am just looking at the chat, and if you do have any questions for Jesper, please you can add them to the chat, or you could turn your camera on if you would like to ask them directly. I can see initially we have a comment from Marcel Coupier, great facilities and setup, but please don't forget there are similar opportunities in the UK, including the ERDF sprint at CPI. So that's useful to point that out. Thank you. While we're waiting to see if there's any question, I wonder, it was interesting to see the process of lead into the projects. And I was wondering if you could just comment on the makeup of the advisory board that looks at the initial applications.
Sure. So there is an external advisory board that looks at applications for coming to Testa Center, and basically the criteria, extremely simply put, the criteria is very simple. The project with the highest or largest benefit would have priority, but then you can score that in different ways, of course. But the advisory board that looks at this is depending on the project. We have a group of 15 individuals, but we typically only engage 3 of them depending on the scope of the project. So if it's a technical, digital, or biological innovation. So, and the application should not be felt as a high administrative hurdle. So we try to keep this as lean and simple as possible, and to give feedback as quick as possible. And also important to say, we have a rolling application, so we don't have calls, or we don't have deadlines. So you can at any point actually submit an application, and it's handled by a neutral organization here in Uppsala called Stunts. They are owned by the municipality and the universities. So they are like a neutral layer. So we in Testa Center actually do not select or pick projects.
I see. That's really useful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jesper. I can see that Marcel has raised his hand. Marcel, if you'd like to ask directly, that's fine. Hi.
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 Hi. So after my shameless plug for CPI, I was going to ask you whether that's a route that maybe would be suitable for you to consider applying for ERDF funding, and perhaps offer not only the facilities, but also perhaps some resource in order to support companies even more.
That's a really good suggestion. Particularly the support for the projects coming into Testa Center. I think that's the most important thing. Of course, it's good to see to it that Testa Center has finance to be able to develop and stuff like that. But I would say that the power should be within the project utilizing the Testa Center. So giving that the possibility to utilize Testa Center, if that is in terms of support, or if actually financial support, or like competence or something like that, that I think is the best part to make this sustainable. So over long run. Excellent example. Perhaps Marcel, you and I should have a meeting offline later on.
Okay.
I would love to have that.
Okay, no problem.
I got your email from the chat there, so thanks a lot for that.
All right.
Sorry, muted. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Jesper? There's a comment here that's come in directly to me. You mentioned that you're set up for standard GPO. What's the process for approving the risk assessments? Are there any capabilities that might not be possible in the Testa Center, for example, radionucleotides or?
Yes, thanks for that. So a little bit background is that me as director of Testa Center has the responsibility for, if we look at work environment safety. So I have the coordinating responsibility, meaning that I need to see to it that everyone that comes into Testa Center has all the information that they need to be able to work safely in Testa Center. The actual work environment responsibility stays with the project. So if a Uppsala University researcher come into Testa Center, Uppsala University is still responsible for the work environment for that individual in Testa Center. Now, when it comes to capabilities of Testa Center, the things that we are allowed to take in. So very good question. We do not have permits for radioactive isotopes in Testa Center. We have the highest safety class that we can take on is biosafety class 2, which basically means adenovirus, lentivirus, influenza virus, relatively mild. So not corona or Ebola or anything like that. We cannot take in EX-classed processes. So if you have a process which encompasses large amounts of volatile solids, for instance, that is not possible to do. So this discussion we usually take as early on as possible, so that we don't late on in a planning phase realize that we have a stopper. And then there are also, of course, particular organisms. So the most usual organisms that we have, so CHO cells, hex cells, E. coli, yeast cells, insect cells, SF9, SF21, we can take into Testa Center. But more exotic things we might need to have a closer look at.
Thanks, Jesper. There's a question here from Beth McDonald, whether you could expand a little bit more about your work in the digital space.
Excellent, very good. So I didn't emphasize a lot on that. So just again, zooming out a little bit, digitalization is a huge, right? It can be basically anything. So we've had a couple of projects attacking this in more specific areas. So we have a couple of projects that actually had a AR, VR application with Google lenses, HoloLenses, with an application for both lab notebook recording, but also for projecting, for instance, an instruction in your glasses while you actually set up your instrumentation, for instance. They had this innovation. They were men. We have no, fortunately, women were guys. They usually are in the IT space today still, unfortunately. But they were, with the background of an IT background. They didn't really have a good picture of what a biological production floor looks like, or what you need to do in an environment like that, the lab environment. So they entered Testa Center and gained extremely valuable, first off, user feedback on their application. They gained some knowledge on the users and the use cases that they were looking at. And they also were able to start to conduct discussions with potential collaborators in Testa Center. So that's like a particular digital application that they came into Testa Center with. We've had other examples in Testa Center, one around security, IT security application. I mean, we have within the biological production space lots of legacy instrumentation that are not super compatible with cloud solutions, for instance, or other modern IT infrastructure solutions. And being able to transfer, collect, and save data from these older instrumentation in a secure way is a hurdle. So they had a solution that they needed to verify in an environment which was relevant to them. We've also had other types of projects in Testa Center verifying their solution for data collection from a variety of instrumentation at the same time, for instance. The data stream from a lab like you have in my background is really huge, and it ranges from everything from small slips like slips that are printed out of the instrumentation to actual full-fledged Excel sheets, tabulated Excel sheets, and everything should be collected in the end. And having a digital application that takes care of this it's another verification that has been done in Testa Center. So basically, we have the possibility to do lots of different things in Testa Center. We have our own network, we have our own server, which is a hybrid solution between a cloud and an on-site server. We are not connected to the site by internet, so we are actually our own, which gives us the opportunity to modulate that according to different project needs. I don't know if that was an answer to your question. I hope I elaborated a little bit on it.
Thank you. There is a little, there's an additional comment here, whether you could expand on the sensors that you have, especially in the bioreactors, and also what you started to refer to it already, but what happens to the data that is collected.
Yes. So the sensors that we have in the bioreactors today, our standard offering are the typical sensors that you would find in a bioreactor. So DO sensors, pH sensors, temperature sensors, and conductivity. So that's the standard offering. Then we have a couple of projects that's been in Testa Center to verify their own solutions for sensing biomass, for instance. We have a foam sensors that have been verified. But I need to ask those projects if I can reveal their secrets before I say anything else. So I'll give that as a teaser. So those are the sensors that we have per default and what you can actually verify here today.
Thanks, Jesper.
Mm.
If I can just ask one super quick question,
Yep.
Is thinking about you had an example of an academic project and projects with the companies.
Yep.
And I think you've mentioned previously, perhaps there's a sort of 50-50 split. What is the spread of academic projects coming into the center versus companies now?
So today, first off, we aim to have a 70% booking of our capacity. That's what we feel is fully booked. We could push it a little bit higher, but that's more or less what we can take in. We need to clean the stuff and maintain the stuff in between and so. So with the 70 booking, of those 70% of our bookable weeks, we have today somewhere a little bit below 30% capacity usage of academic groups / education. So this is what we refer to in state aid regulations as non-economical projects. So we're regulated by state aid rules from the EU. And then the rest is typically commercial projects, so which is then defined as economical. So that's where we are today. We would very much like to increase the academic presence a little bit more. We're aiming for 40%. So that's our goal.
That's really useful to know, and then that you want to see the earlier stage, perhaps.
Yes,
projects
exactly.
as well. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any final questions for Jesper? If not, I know that we have a number of people who've registered and who are going to want to be looking at the recording of this talk. So I think you may well have some further reach out coming to you once that's live. But we really appreciate your time today, Jesper. Really useful to learn about the center with you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and warmly looking forward to those reaching out activities. I'll be happy to answer emails. So thanks a lot for taking me today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I can see other thanks coming in from the audience. Thanks, Jesper.
Thank you.